Thanks.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Welcome to the Executive Scrutiny Board meeting, Tuesday the 19th of January. If I can welcome the officers and members of Executive Scrutiny and any other members of other scrutiny boards who may already have joined us or will be joining us, and Cabinet members as well. There's only one item tonight, but that's pretty important, and we're going to have plenty of opportunity to ask questions of both officers and Cabinet members, so I will take those in due course. And then, of course, we've got the full council meeting tomorrow and the budget meeting as well in February. Right, so we'll start off. Simon, I think you're going to present the headlines of the budget, and then each strategic director will go through briefly through their budget reductions and issues that they've got. I want to save the majority of the meeting for members to ask the relevant questions, so that's where I envisage 90% of the time being spent this evening.
Chair,
Okay.
just before we...
Chair, I'll just go through the agenda items. First of all, I've got no apologies at item 1, Chair. To my knowledge, there are no late items at item 2. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations of interest?
Yeah, any declarations of interest?
And we can move on, Chair, I think. Thank you.
Please shout up. Right, Miles, thank you for letting us know. I know I unfortunately need to leave us at 6. We'll try and get as much done as we can before you leave us, if we can, Simon. Miles, sorry. Right, okay, Simon, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to members of the scrutiny panel to coming to this budget scrutiny. Budget scrutiny by members, by by the business community, and also by the public at Derby is an important part of scrutinising this budget about how the money delivers the outcomes for the city. And this budget, as you can see from the report that Cabinet issued for consultation in December, indicates many challenges that this council is facing, both in terms of the impact of the pandemic, reshaping services, and the financial sustainability, which is impacting almost every council of being able to meet the needs of our community in the future. And on page 4 and 5 of the Cabinet budget paper, it highlights some of those changes that we had. As I've explained to members previously, we've got the situation where the budget this year was prepared around themes, so cross-cutting themes, and they're detailed in paragraph 4.15, and the themes were digital council, property rationalisation, transforming cities and transport, demand management commercialisation, community working model better together, and service optimisation, effective, efficient and economic services. Details of what they encompassed are on page 9 and in the appendices. So on that basis, Chair, this is a budget which is created around outcomes, not directorate build up against a target. So I'd encourage members to basically ask questions against the outcomes which I've just highlighted. And in the paragraph 4.3 of the covering report, it talks that budget scrutiny should focus on public value, demonstrating a good use of resources, the issue of proposed budget changes on service delivery and cross-cutting outcomes, the impact of the pandemic on the council's budget and future financial sustainability, high risk and high cost areas of spend, and how long-term trends, demand pressures and challenges define the financial strategy. So in order for maybe just to help guide you through here, I would suggest to the scrutiny panel that we maybe focus on the areas that I said initially, which are in paragraph 4.15, in terms of those themes, as opposed to trying to do it directorate by directorate, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, I'm quite happy with that. Right, so it's now a question if we're going to deal with it in the way that Simon suggests. At this stage, I'll take any councillor comments or questions that they may have. On any particular area. I know, Miles, that you need to leave us at 6. Have you got any questions at all of the director? Are you there, Miles?
No, not at the moment, thanks.
Okay.
Chair.
Yeah, Lucy, yes?
Chair, I have a question which it's for information. In that one of the council's priorities and the city's priorities is to deal with our climate impacts and becoming zero carbon. And I was going to ask advice as to which of those theme areas actually do we put climate change into?
Thank you.
Or is that cross-cutting across everything? In which case, how should we address it?
Yeah, who's the best person to answer that, Simon? Is that you or one of your colleagues?
Myself, Chair. I think Councillor Clare has answered her own question. It is a cross-cutting issue which impacts on all of these themes. There's the benefits of the digital economy and digital proposals, Internet of Things, smart cities. That is definitely contributing to climate. Property rationalisation is about making sure we have the right assets with the right climate credentials contributing towards that, and some of the sort of climate proposals there. Transforming cities and transport is very much about reducing the transport footprint, if you want to call it, of the city, number of journeys required. Demand management and commercialisation is again making sure right across the board, from energy costs to other things, the climate agenda is there. Community working model, it is, as we know, a fundamental part of the community will at the climate emergency and our response to that. And then service optimisation is how can we be more economic efficient and effective in terms of the climate agenda. I think Councillor Care raised on the 15th of December the budget report as written in December probably was not explicit enough about how this budget strategy contributed to the climate imperative and the climate agenda we got. And in the report that will come back in February, there'll be more of the climate context put into the report. But hopefully I've given you some indication that officers, my colleagues, are considering these on each of the proposals as well as the direction of travel. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. Just before I take Stephen, Simon, if I can ask you, there has been concern raised about the projected use of reserves in future years, especially with the uncertainty of future government funding. We've had one-off grants for this year, but unless that they're made permanent, we're going to have problems. Can you guarantee that we won't dwindle down reserves to a level where we have major problems in future years?
Thank you for the question, and I think there's two sides to the answer to that. Firstly, the report does highlight that if the government was to continue the level of funding they've given us, admittedly in this year as potentially one-off, then we'd have a balanced budget. If some of those one-off grants get reversed out, the budget indicates that we have a budget gap in excess of £10 million. This is by every council in the country in terms of a short-term financial planning horizon of the government at the moment. It's a one-year spending review. But I can probably give members of the scrutiny panel assurance that this budget, which you have in front of you, is a budget that makes no recurrent use of reserves to help balance the budget in this financial year. Point to meet the financial challenges of financial sustainability going forward. We will try and manage our budget to not require a use of reserves, but as members will know, there are some demand-led activities such as looked after children where it is difficult to forecast accurately because we have a statutory responsibility, but we are in a good position and we will be lobbying the government to try and ensure that we get sustainable funding going forward. And maybe just to highlight to members, my headphones aren't working and my machine says that you might be getting some echo, so if I am a bit distorted, I apologise. In respect of the technology, I'm having to speak to the machine rather than through a headphone. Thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, Sam, you do sound a bit like a Dalek, but that's nothing personal. It's just can't be helped. I understand. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Simon. And in many respects, I do feel for you and your officer colleagues that the dire position that the lack of sustainable funding as we move forward puts us in, because it is precarious. And for us to be able to survive, like many councils, we do require that government action. And I hope that we're not waiting too long to hear some positive news on that. But me and my group will certainly be continuing to push for answers, because the people of Derby need to be reassured about the future of their public services, which are already threadbare after 10 years of cuts. So anyway, I'll park that for now. Stephen, you want to come in? You've got some questions. Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, I've got to change chair. I've got one of my own, but first of all, I'd just like to ask a bit of a follow-on from your question, if I may, and then we'll come back to my own one. But just to follow on from your one, Chair, is obviously you're not using reserves this year, but I don't see anything in there about, because obviously this council has made extensive use of reserves to sort of balance the budget over the last few years. You're obviously not this year, but my concern would be, you know, how do we not know that we might have to do that again? Reserves are sort of going down. There's nothing seems to be in this year. It's almost like the old, if I can go back to the story, dare I say, to the story of Joseph in Egypt and stuff in the Bible, that in the sort of, when we've got an opportunity, we're not actually stocking up those reserves this year, and I don't see anything about that in the budget. So what would be your suggestion? Why is there nothing to stock up reserves in the budget then?
Thank you. And can I maybe just give two parts to the answer there? You said, Councillor Willoughby, that we had to use reserves to balance the budget. I'd probably say we had to use reserves to meet essential need for the community of Derby, especially around social care, children's costs. And if you have a look at the drawdown on reserves for the past couple of years, almost all of that drawdown on reserves is meeting a statutory responsibility to keep our young people safe. The budgets were not, in I think the past 2 years at least, drawing down on reserves to balance the budget, but demand pressures has meant there has been a drawdown. I think I just really probably want to respond to the second part of the question, and it is in the covering report and in the budget report, which talks that we had to incorporate 22.287 million of pressures in 21-22, which were made up of social care demand pressures, made up of COVID pressures, and other pressures to do the right thing for Derby. So in that context, trying to find a budget strategy that addressed 22.7 million was a big challenge for the authority, and we knew we had to make that for the forthcoming financial year. I made a very clear guidance to the administration that I wanted us to try and look at a budget that at least prepared us in terms of financial sustainability without a drawdown on reserves. And they took up that challenge, or if you want to call it the guidance that they got from myself, to try and do that. And as I said earlier, this is a budget that does not require on recurrent use of balances. But having said that, Councillor Willoughby, it would have been very difficult in this uncertain year and the transition and impact of the shock on our medium-term financial plan we set last year to contribute to reserves. So I just want to give credit, especially to my director colleagues, about how they tackled the challenge facing them in coming up with the proposals in this paper. So I hope that answers your question, Councillor Willoughby.
Thank you very much for that. If I can come back, I mean, I see on page 21 that there's reference there about income pressures have increased following COVID pandemic in the areas of parking, leisure services. It said headline also include loss of leisure and cultural income 0.460 million, loss of parking income 1.046 million. Now, over and above these, do you expect what other losses of income are there, and is that the total, Simon?
Okay, thank you, Chair. The city was experiencing a number of income levels plateauing or reducing prior to the pandemic, such as car parking in the city centre, such as leisure activity income plateauing, such as development control income maybe reducing from its high peak previously. We saw in this year, as you know, from closure of facilities or doing the right thing for Derby, where we had to give rent holidays, car parking, obviously as people weren't travelling, was reducing, leisure centres had to shut. The government has subsidised 75% of the income losses that we have experienced this financial year, which is very welcome. But in the budget, we have had to assume that following lockdown, our income levels will not bounce back to pre-pandemic levels. And you'll notice in the budget there is a line which talks about a placeholder for reduction in income levels. And we will do everything that we can to maximise it. But I know you would want, Councillor Repton, that I, as the Council's Treasurer, is prudent in forecasting the potential impact of this to make sure that we don't have an unbudgeted surprise happening early on in the year when we should have at least been prudent in our forecasts. Thank you.
Okay. Stephen, yes, would you like to come in? You've got another question, I understand.
Yeah, I have, yeah. Just firstly, just to come back on the answer to the first question, you know, I'm not sure, because I'm not sure if you can point to me where in the budget it talks about whether it should do replenishing reserves, and I appreciate your comments about how it was used to you know, to provide essential services, of course. But so, and how do we know that's not going to happen this year with this budget, because that wasn't expenditure that was planned for. But also, you know, where is it that we're looking to try and stock up reserves, because they will eventually, you know, run out if we don't stock them out, and that's common sense. So that's my first sort of point or question. The second one is about something that's not in the MTFP, because last week we, of course, part of our meeting last week, we scrutinised the paper that was going to Cabinet in response to the motion at full council on about free school meals provision, and of course there was one comment in there that said it wasn't included in the MTFP, and we made a recommendation that was unfortunately rejected by the Cabinet, you know, to actually say, well, it should go in the MTFP. So I'm just looking at your sort of officer advice, really, is why do you think it's not in the MTFP? Do you think it something as fundamental as that, you know, the free school meals and the spend that's going to be on that, is that actually going to be in the MTFP? And then just another point just to clear up on that I'm confused over is this paper talks about the 4.49 increase in council tax, whereas that paper on the free school meals says it was going to go, because of, you know, in order to sort of finance that, it was going to go for the full 4.99% increase in council tax. So what will that figure actually be in the final paper that's going to be presented to Cabinet in February? Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, for that. In respect of reserves, I did put a paragraph in paragraph 4.76 on page 24, but for the benefit of the YouTube audience, I'll read out. It says, after all commitments are factored in the balance of uncommitted reserves, it reduces down to 18.837 million, or about 7.4% of the net revenue budget. The Council should consider in the future building up reserves to increase the Council's financial resilience and financial sustainability. Tight financial management and gatekeeping uncosted commitments are essential in the future. So Again, I would say that I have made a very clear message in this report and also in commissioning the budget process around the need for financial resilience and, if possible, to create further resilience by building up reserves. That was not possible in setting the budget for 21-22, though that will form part of our financial strategy approach going forward. Councillor Willoughby, you asked about the question of how can I not guarantee it in the future. This council has a responsibility for a number of activity-led budgets, such as children's social care, adult social care, and other regulatory and statutory interventions. We have monitoring processes in place to try and establish any adverse trends and, where possible, to address those in year. During this pandemic year, I think you'll appreciate that the focus has been on keeping people safe, and that probably meant that it was difficult to implement some action plans in this year to address the overspend that was forecast in Q1 of 2020-21. But I will, and I have a statutory responsibility, as you know, as a 151 officer, to ensure robust financial administration and tight financial management, and that is a key message that all the budget holders in this council understand for the next financial year. In respect of the recommendation in respect of free school meals, I think the meeting last week made it very clear that was a executive function, of which we responded in that report to the need for it to be put in front of the executive, a series of costed options, and based on that, we have said that that will now be incorporated into the budget after consultation. When this budget was issued on, I think it was the 8th of December, we did not have the costed options, so it would have been inappropriate to just put a placeholder in there in the budget issued for consultation. And obviously the funding for that was in the paper last week on financial support support to children in school holidays, recommended a series of financing there of how those commitments could be met, and that will be incorporated in the budget that Cabinet will consider on the 9th of February to go to Council on the 24th of February. So everything is in line with our constitutional processes of incorporation in the budget that will eventually come to Council tax resolution. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, sir. Simon, can I ask you about property rationalisation? There's some reference to it on page 9. Can you expand on that a little bit and perhaps give members a flavour of what's already been sold or what's proposed to be sold, and give us an update on Alistry Hall? Okay.
The council has a series of properties surplus to requirements that currently might have costs attached to it in respect of security, maintenance, rates, etc., etc. And one of the areas we want to look at is to try and divest ourselves of any liabilities attached to that. That could be for sale. It could be looking at whether there's community use.
Can you hear me? Simon, are you talking through the microphones?
I am. I explained earlier that my headphones aren't working, so I have to speak to the machine. I apologise for that. So we have surplus properties. Some properties may be able to be transferred to the community sector. We can potentially use for sort of a transfer to the housing revenue account to meet housing need. And so what we've done is to carry out an assessment of properties that maybe fall into those categories, and we have a plan going forward. There is a plan to transfer a number of bits of land and property to the HRA to meet housing need, which we know is an urgent need in the city. There is the proposal to look at the utilisation of some of our assets, like our multi-storey car parks, and to look at the future provision for that. And there's also vacating some buildings and co-locating services to drive out economic efficiencies. All of those, along with longer term plans about where we have assets in the same location and future benefits, are part of that plan.
Simon, can you and your colleagues please ensure that we continue to get regular specific updates as to what obviously with regard to I have to take into mind confidentiality, I understand that, but updates as to what's being sold or what has been sold throughout the city, particularly in members' own wards. Can we have regular updates about that, please?
Yes, we can do that, but I draw all members of the Executive Scrutiny attention to the meeting of the Corporate Scrutiny Panel last Thursday, which considered exactly this issue.
Okay, if you can make sure that all councillors are given feedback from that, Simon, through your colleagues, I'd be grateful. Is that okay?
Yes, that's okay. I'm just going to plug in a new set of headphones, so I'm going to disappear off a call for about half a minute.
Okay, okay. Right, we'll wait for Simon to get himself sorted out. Then the next question I want to ask is about job losses. So when he rejoins us, I'll ask him to take us through that. So I've got a question on that. I've also got a question about the proposed council tax increases, how it compares to other local authorities. So again, I'll wait for Simon to rejoin us, and then we can make some progress.
Unfortunately, my headphones are not working any better, so I'm still going to have to speak to the machine. I do apologise to members.
Simon, two questions from myself. One on job losses. Where, in terms of the job losses, can you just confirm where these will be, what the financial saving for these job losses will be, and what you envisage the proposed reduced service will look like as a consequence of these job losses?
Thank you, Chair. The job losses are detailed in Appendix 2 in the last two columns, which details exactly where the job losses are. Out of the 39 job losses which are highlighted, 25 are vacant posts. So therefore the impact on our Team Derby staffing level is relatively small. We have carried out an assessment of the impact of that. Some is linked to a reduction in service. Some of that is linked to more effective ways of working. And where possible, we are reallocating staff there. And obviously part of this budget strategy is to make sure we have the right skills for the future, which honour the contribution of our staff. So those staff who are impacted are currently in a process of engaging with their heads of service and through the HR process. And though it is always unfortunate when you have to look at job losses, the impact of this budget is marginal on the overall staffing of the council. Thank you, Chair.
I'd like to ask a question of the Cabinet Member for Adult Social Care, Councillor Webb. Councillor Webb, in terms of the reductions and efficiencies in your area of responsibility, are you quite confident that the needs of the elderly people of Derby and their families will be fully and properly met? Are you with us, Councillor Webb?
Chair, you might want to ask Andy Smith that question.
Well, I'd like the Cabinet Member to answer it if he would. That's why Cabinet members have been invited. Are you there, Roy? Come in, Roy. Okay, perhaps we'll put that question to him on another day. I'll come back to the council tax increases now with you, Simon, if I may. In terms of the percentage council tax increase that we're proposing for this year in Derby, how does that compare to the percentage of the council tax increase for cities around Derby, like Nottingham and Leicester? Do you have any idea?
Right. Yes, I can answer that. I believe both both neighbouring cities are going to be levying the full permitted council tax without a referendum of 4.99%. As part of working across the country is the Society of Municipal Treasurers and Society of Unitary Treasurers. I can confirm that at least 80%, and I think it's nearer 95% of councils are planning to increase the council tax in line with the assumption the government gave in the core spending power. And in the core spending power, which is their measure of money to local government, they assumed that upper tier councils like ourselves would maximise the council tax at 4.99%.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Steve, Simon, shall I say? Stephen, you've got another question. You want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll just ask a few of them, actually, just who the relevant officer is. In section 4.15, obviously, under the Community Better Together model, under that theme, we talked a lot here about reimagining, recreating neighbourhood working. So what do you envisage by that? What will happen, and what is the saving on that? And just to clarify, I think it says somewhere, I clarified for an earlier question in a bit of a follow-on from one of your questions, Chair. I think it's actually the actual posts that are actually going to be cut, if you like, the people that are going to potentially, sadly, lose their jobs. You're proposing a 15. I think is that the right number? And then if I just go down through my notes a minute, if there was anything more. Sorry about this. I just have to go through. It's this sort of sticky note thing that you do. So yeah. So under 4.54. I've sort of asked originally is, you know, I think we dealt earlier on about, you know, you said earlier on in response to my earlier questions about having to sort of, you know, draw down on reserves to, you know, to allow to meet the council to meet its statutory needs, and obviously the council has to and not leave people vulnerable. That's, you know, that's absolutely right. But, you know, I'm just wondering what's been done to, you know, to make sure, you know, that the modelling has improved to sort of make sure that the risk of that is actually reduced in this budget, and it doesn't sort of have to go into, you know, to reserves to do that in this budget. And then I had another thing on free school meals, which I think we've dealt with previously, so we're all right on that one. And yeah, and I think I said previously about involving community groups in tree planting activities and stuff, which is a response to one of your other comments. So okay, I think okay with it's just questions, please.
Okay, what I'm going to do now, we've got I think we ought to bring the strategic directors in now to talk briefly, I stress briefly, through their budget proposals as they relate to their directorates. Rachel is going to answer the question on Better Together, but who's going to answer Stephen's last question? Is that Simon or one of your colleagues, Simon?
I was trying to establish exactly what the question was around staffing. I indicated earlier that the staffing was 39, it's detailed in paragraph 4.79, that there was 39 posts, 0.4 posts being deleted, of which most of those were vacant, 25 were vacant. So I'm not sure what additional clarification you wanted, Councillor Willoughby.
Just that you said, I know when we've been at the various briefings, I've seen on some of your earlier slides you presented at the figure of sort of 14 or 15, and I should be just clarifying the number, because I think you said that the 15 there is a number of posts being deleted with people in post. I think when I came to you with some earlier comments on this MTFP, that's what you said. So, you know, for the purposes of this meeting, to help mark in, you know, the answer to to the chair's question, just to clarify that your sort of the 39.4 that you refer to is obviously cutting. mainly from cutting down vacancies, but the actual people, if you like, that will lose their jobs is 15. Is that correct, or is it a different figure? It's just
I think just to give clarity, that the 25 plus 14 is 39. There's 15 people in post which are obviously being proposed to be disestablished from the structure. The whole process of achieving change that we have is to, where possible, find alternative opportunities for those people to remain with Derby City Council. So it is our hope that as we go through that process, as we delete posts, that other opportunities may come up. So it is impossible until that process is concluded to know whether there will be any compulsory redundancies from that. But at the moment, there's 15 people in posts which are included in this budget pack.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Right, I'm going to move on to Rachel to answer the question on Better Together, and then I'm going to invite the strategic directors to briefly talk through their budget proposals. Rachel, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so Better Together, Stephen, is one of the transformational projects for the Council for the future that is referenced in the budget. So it hasn't got attached to it individual budget changes or savings. It is a project about how we can better coordinate and affect better coordination of our locality officers in neighbourhoods. So we have a really, really strong neighbourhood offer, but how can we actually strengthen that by supporting other work we do in the council into those teams in a more coordinated way? So particularly around our local area coordinators, who obviously are in an adult space, and other officers, so we can actually do more problem solving as teams in locality, so we can hopefully reduce the demand that comes through the system by working proactively in those teams with our voluntary and community sector or colleagues to actually support preventing people coming into our more high cost traditional services, so adults and children's most principally in the longer term. So the overarching transformation project there and saving is about demand reduction and prevention, but there is nothing in this budget now about reducing the capacity of those teams. The opposite, really, about enhancing them by better coordination across the council. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Rachel. Okay, what I'm going to do now is take the strategic directors. Who wants to kick off?
I'll go first. It would be helpful. So I'm just talking.
Yes, please. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry,
so, and I think what was being laid out to members so far in this meeting really is important to reference, in that this is a holistic budget for the organisation, and recognising that although we have services in directorates and in functions, we actually work much more as one organisation, and there are interdependencies between things. So just reflecting that reality, even though we have obviously got separate directorates, we are working much more holistically as an organisation, so there are interdependencies. So in my service area, we have worked really hard to make sure that our priority is to maintain frontline capacity. I mean, clearly all members would have referenced the fact that over the last, the last year of COVID, the work of some of those frontline services has been absolutely critical. So do everything we can to reduce taking any capacity out of those services. So fundamentally our approach has been about efficiency and looking at opportunities to remodel, to reduce vacant posts, to bring in additional commercial income where that makes sense to do so, and there are a variety of examples of that in the budget, and to work much more collaboratively with colleagues in our partner organisations to reduce costs but actually maintain the delivery of service. So some of the things therefore in that list, we have looked at bringing in new technology, things like whiteboards and other efficiency measures into our street pride and highway service that maximise the efficiency of those services without taking away any of the capacity. So using some of those mechanisms, that enables us to target our approaches much more effectively than perhaps doing blanket offers across the council. In terms of our priority around supporting recycling, that obviously increases, it reduces the amount of waste going through in diversion in the cost that incurs around waste disposal, so really promoting our recycling, accepting the reality of reduction in public transport, and therefore our subsidy into the concessionary fares service can be reduced and has been reduced in previous years, and that's a reasonable thing to assume is going to continue. We've also looked at clearly the cabinet report that went through recently on the household waste recycling centre to restrict access to that to Derby and Derbyshire residents, again reduces some of the cost going through that service and some of that waste disposal cost, so we've included that within the budget. We've looked at where there are vacant posts across various services and where they can be lost without any detriment to frontline service that have been put forward, and also to recognise the reality of there are some services, and they are limited, where the level of demand into that service is low and likely to remain low, and therefore we have to cut our cloth accordingly. So in terms of our Derby Live box office events programming service, clearly without the events going on in the assembly rooms and the Guildhall, etc., and the issues around COVID, there's less work for those teams. So we are suggesting a small reduction in staff in there, unfortunately. That's only part of the part of my directorate, which includes redundancies. Overall, we've tried to work in a way that is as fair as possible to maintain that frontline priority. And I said at the beginning, in terms of our principles, it's also working in collaboration. So the events programme, for example, in terms of our events across the city, by reducing that by the 80,000, but working with our cultural partners to reduce the impact of that by maintaining the same level of events, but doing it collaboratively, reduce some of the costs. Like if we managed to achieve that, we have some plans in place to achieve that with no detriment to any of the events we put on. I reference the work we did in the marketplace for Christmas is a good example of that. We had in Glasgow and the Quad and Sinfonia Viva, etc. We've managed to much more efficiently across a service system rather than looking at it as the council, running those events. So a mixed bag of things, but I would sort of sum them up really for the members about efficiency, doing the best we can what we've got, really thinking about how we target our resources more effectively, where there are opportunities for commercial income to drive those, where we can work in collaboration to drive those. So a real sense of, I think, I concur with comments made by Simon, that we have tried really hard to maintain our focus and our capacity at the front line, because we recognise how important those services are.
Thank you very much, Rachel. That's very thorough and succinct. Can I take the next director, and then I'll take a question, in actual fact, before that, from Paul Pegg. Councillor Pegg, you'd like to ask a question?
Yes, please, Chair. Rachel, thanks for that. I still have great reservations over the reduction in the range rate recycling. There's savings there of £350,000 to be made. My worry is that, like today, I've been out, and in Campion Street there was, I think it's 12 bags, 2 fridges have been dumped there. Now that's going to be an extra cost on the council to go out and pick those up, where people would probably have maybe driven down and dumped them. How are we going to fund that sort of extra cost of going round and clearing these sites? Because there are lots of them, and it's getting worse. And it is getting worse, no matter what people say. If you drive around the streets, especially the back streets, you can see it. If you go to the end of Great Northern Road, there must be 3 or 4 mattresses dumped in there as well. So my concern is where we're going to get the cost from to carry on picking this stuff up.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I mean, in terms of clearly, any of these things are going to raise potential risks, and we need to be able to be quite flight of foot to deal with them. The fundamental principle about how we've looked at the service and how we can be more efficient is to be much more targeted. So some of the technology we're going to be introducing into Street Pride will allow us to target particular hotspots like that, so we can go out and just deal with those hotspots rather than doing streets around the whole city, which costs us more and is less efficient. So I recognise there are some risks around that, but that's our attempt to try and mitigate those risks.
Thank you, Rachel. Lucy's got a question, and then Stephen wants to come back in because he feels his second question wasn't answered. So Lucy, next, please. Thank you.
Hi, I was going to ask about that recycling. I understand the government is currently consulting on having expectations of separate collection of food waste, which will be coming in 22-23, and I can't see any provision for that. Might be 23-24, but 23 is the year I believe it's expected for. I can't see where that's provided for in this, so I just wondered what was being anticipated for that requirement.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. And we are still waiting for clarity around national guidance around recycling. There are a number of proposals that are being talked through but not being come through in official guidance. So clearly we would need to respond to that at that time. We haven't built that into the budget because it isn't clear enough what we need to build into the budget at this stage. I mean, obviously Scotland and Wales are doing collection of pop bottles, etc., and recycling of those. That's quite a major scheme that Wales and Scotland have introduced. We're not sure that's going to be required for us as well. So we're a number of unknowns about the government's intention around recycling, and clearly we'd need to build that in if it happened, but we haven't built that into this budget. But we are aware of those issues and keeping on top of them.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Stephen, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, just to say, it was a question to Simon. It was around just to clarify what lessons have been, because obviously you mentioned that we said earlier about the having to sort of dip into reserves to help essential services, which is the right thing to do, but obviously that's not sustainable. So it's just to check that there has been adequate, what sort of modelling has gone in to try and predict what the expenditure. I know it's very difficult. I appreciate it's very difficult to do that because we know none of us. Well, probably this year, probably could have predicted something would happen with COVID because it was beginning to start to spread, wasn't it, this time last year? But you understand my meaning. None of us could have predicted this when we were preparing, doing the initial stages of the 2021 budget, of course. So, I fully appreciate that. But I just wondered what's been done to try and, if you like, prevent that sort of unplanned, if you like, if I can call it that, dip into reserves, because it is a concern I've got about the long-term sustainability with the level of reserves. I think you yourself have sort of brought out as well, Chair. So it's sort of a bit following along from your line of questioning as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I think we can give assurance to members that for our volatile budgets, not only do we monitor it on a monthly basis, we also use business intelligence and modelling. We have the policy, information and communications team, the insight team, effectively helping to model it. So we have, with the children that we look after, we monitor them child by child. But I think here you ask, what do we do to try and manage it or mitigate it? We have a demand management initiative. This budget details, for example, benefits to come from looking at exiting care or educare placements, and we use all the intelligence we have to try and avoid unplanned use of reserves. But having said that, at 1 week in last year, 11 children from a limited number of family groups entered our looked after children system to make sure those children are safe. So we are constantly on top of this and we have good monitoring, but we have a statutory responsibility, as I know Councillor Willoughby is aware, to for looked after children, and we will try and monitor that as best as we can and avoid shocks, and if we do have shocks, try and have solutions to mitigate it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, on to the next strategic director. Who wants to take this next, please?
Thanks, Martin. Shall I come in? It's Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Thank you.
Hi. Okay, just to really pick up, just to contextualise the savings from an adult and children's perspective in the MTFP. I'm not going to go through them line by line, but just to try and set some context and then pick out some key points ready for members. I mean, just to build on what Simon has said, it will come as no surprise, I think, that the approach and the emphasis around the bulk of the proposals in the MTFP for adults and children's is very much around demand management, and the work that we've been doing across adults and children's for some time. Some of this work goes back 2 or 3 years in how we approach and manage demand, and that clearly now is being seen within that Better Together context that Rachel outlined earlier. If I start with children's, because that's where we've got the biggest set of challenges, that picks up on Councillor Willoughby's point and Simon's point and so on, and you would have seen the challenge that we have in children's social care through monitoring reports that come through to Scrutiny en route to Cabinet, and this is by no means a unique situation to Derby. I think the report goes into some detail around the national challenges that all councils are experiencing in children's social care, particularly around the costs of children in care, which has really exacerbated during the COVID pandemic because the whole system has really slowed down considerably as a result of the implications and impact of the pandemic across the country and across the East Midlands and in Derby. So there is a real focus within the MTFP on demand management, which takes into account and builds on the work that we've been doing across children's services. We have a demand management corporate board, which I chair as strategic director, and this is really a board that brings together directors and senior leaders from across the whole council, looking at that horizontal view really at how all council departments can contribute towards some of the particular challenges that we've got and opportunities that we have as well in terms of how we tackle the issue of rising numbers of children in care and rising costs of children in care. And you'll see in the budget that a lot of the proposals are around how we continue to build on the progress we've made today and how we shape and develop our own internal market and our own internal placement capacity so that we are better equipped and better able to place children that might ordinarily and currently being placed in external residential placements, particularly those residential placements that are very costly, into our own provision. And you'll see that we've got a strategy there of developing and building on our residential provision, which has already started in year and will continue as we move into 21-22, which is very much around moving children from the external market into our own provision, either through in our children's homes or through to step down accommodation that we develop with Derby Homes, or through to 2 smaller homes that we're planning to open for children with particularly complex needs that ordinarily would be placed out of the city and would be very costly because they might require a home that just has a sole occupant or 2 children. And this is really a key plank of our MTFP, and we've modelled it based on children in the system, and we've also modelled it, picking up on Simon's point, around what we forecast the numbers will look like moving forward, because we're getting increasingly more sophisticated at understanding, what our numbers look like moving forward in terms of children in care, and then trying to respond in an agile way. What we've also got in there is capacity to try and expedite the safe and appropriate move from the system of children in care by building up our exit from care team and really targeting those children that we think are able to move out of the system, in a really focused way in terms of that cohort. We're also building on the work we've been doing around trying to build up our foster carers and the work that we've been doing corporately around foster care recruitment, which is, paying dividends really, and we haven't lost any foster carers during COVID, which is a really good position to be in, given what I hear from some other authorities in the region. And then the work that we've been doing, which has come previously to Scrutiny en route to Cabinet, around the social impact bond process, which is now up and running. That is a project that we're doing in collaboration with Nottingham and Nottinghamshire. So there's a whole kind of suite of activities there that's been calculated based on children that are in the system that we think, based on the work that we've done, will lead to savings moving forward. And our ambition to have our own vibrant market around children in care, given the increasing challenges of trying to manage the market externally, which is really, really challenging at the moment. it's also worth noting that across adults and children's services, there's no impact in this MTFP on frontline services, just picking up on Rachel's point and reiterating what Simon has said, which I think is really positive. And I think just picking up some of the adult issues as well. I mean, again, there's a theme in there around demand management in terms of, really maximising the impact that I think we'd all agree local area coordination makes in terms of managing demand, in terms of developing that service and how we pay for that service and how we maximise income to pay for that service as well moving forward. And again, seeing local area coordination as part of that integrated locality offer that's going to be really integral as we move out of the pandemic and into BAU, if that day ever comes, moving forward, just building on that better together approach as well. There's something in there around the fact that, we are no longer going to be a provider of day centre services, and there's something in there in relation to getting out of that market. And again, that kind of was picked up in the MTFP last year as well. So I suppose, Martin, that's a really kind of whistle-stop tour of the kind of a process and approach within adults and children's.
Thanks very much, Andy. There are a number of questions I want, but these are political questions, and it's not fair to field them at you. I'm disappointed that we've now lost Roy Webb. We have no cabinet members on, because the questions I want to ask are political, and I'm not going to put you in that position. Because, Andy, you do remind me a little bit of Wayne Rooney, the position that he is in at the present time. You're trying to provide a service which is vital for the people of Derby, and yet the funders aren't there. Where are the funders from the Middle East, the shaking is millions that you actually need? And you're doing an incredibly good job as a professional, but will be being let down by the politicians yet again? Because I and my colleagues believe that demand management equals rationing. And whatever happened to Boris's promise of a resolution to the care crisis, joined up working and sorting funding out? Because every time, Andy, you and your colleagues do an excellent job, but you fight it without your hands behind your back. You're never given the resources to meet the needs of people of this city. Now, I'm only going to make those comments because it's not fair to ask you the questions I would have liked to ask them of cabinet members. Anyway, I've made the point. Any more comments or questions from other members of the executive committee to Andy before we move on to the next strategic director? Okay.
Chair, may I? I'm not sure if you're keeping up with the notes. I was just going to pick up on the foster carers, and it's really good news that we haven't lost any over this challenging period. I think that really is a positive reflection both on them as individuals and the support that we're still being able to give such people. But on the other side, we had figures. I can't think where we got them from, but we had figures recently of the number of people who are now having to claim universal credit, and I think it's gone up very significantly, 130% in Derby. Now, some of those people who have probably lost jobs, who have been laid off, may also be the people who potentially are our next cohort of people to come into foster caring. And I don't know, this is going to be the moment to be starting to get in touch with those people, and also probably a cohort of people that will be upset in their career paths over the next 6 months. So are we putting in additional resources to enable and support and to recruit sufficiently those people who could be those new foster carers?
Right.
I mean, that's an excellent question, Lucy, and this is something that we've been looking at our corporate fostering board in terms of trying to ensure that we work creatively to really build on some of the challenges, I suppose, that arise from COVID in terms of opportunities that may present themselves in terms of individuals that may be at a point now where they may be at risk of losing their job, or they may have lost their job, or they want a career change, or they want to try something different, and really trying to think about how we encourage and engage with individuals that might potentially see fostering as a real career choice moving forward. And we've been trying to really put forward fostering as a positive career choice for individuals, and the work that Sue Ann has been involved in, who's leading this, I think, and we hope, is going to ensure that we can maintain some of those numbers moving forward. So the short answer is yes. We are trying to take the opportunities that arise, within this really challenging COVID context that we're all working in.
Thank you very much, Andy. I'm going to
Chair, through you,
Lucy,
are we putting the sufficient resource in to do that?
Lucy, I'll come back to you. There are other people that want to ask a question. I haven't asked them so far. So I'm going to take Fareed, because he's asked none so far, then Stephen. If you've got some more, Lucy, please come back then. Fareed, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Andy, you know and I know that we have made cuts to adult care services generally in the past, and we've been trying to have an efficiency drive to reduce the cost of providing those services. I am a little bit worried about the daycare, reduction in daycares or efficiencies in daycares that are being listed. That you hope that you'll probably achieve something like 300,000, just under 300,000 pounds in efficiency savings. As far as I know, it concerns mainly daycare provision to people with learning disabilities. Well, there are two elements to support that's offered to vulnerable people in general. One is to make sure they don't come to harm. And the other element, which is crucial, but which has been cut and again and again and again, is about helping people maintain or enhance their quality of life. And our focus has been mainly, where possible, we've been actually making cuts into reducing their quality of life. So although they may not come to serious harm as a result, but the proposals have caused me anxiety that this is going to have serious impact probably on the quality of life that they're having. There'll be an impact potentially on carers if you make any serious reductions. They will probably survive, but what I'm saying is I have got serious concerns that there will be a serious impact on the quality of life that they're having. Can you reassure me that that is not going to happen and that you will actually avoid that situation where the direct impact on their quality of life is going to become a reality?
Well, let me try and provide some reassurance, Councillor Hussain. I think if we go back a couple of years to the transformation programme that we've really taken forward in adult social care, which was about the adult social care services within Derby moving away from those traditional day centre services and into a service which was around giving individuals more choice and more flexibility around how they might use their direct payment, how they might commission their own services, trying to really build the market locally and move away from what were quite old-fashioned ways of providing services for clients to services that some clients were telling us that they would actually benefit from more, and the evidence was showing that services that weren't necessarily based from a day centre gave people a better quality of life and enabled them to be more integrated in their communities and in their localities. I suppose to provide some reassurance in terms of the work that was done around the closure of Morleston and Inspire, and hopefully colleagues, councillors will be aware of this. It was done in a very sensitive and measured way through social work assessment, social work support, working with the individual customers, working with their families in terms of identifying alternative provision and support for those clients. And it was done at a pace that was right for the individual, not necessarily a pace that was about closing a centre at a particular given date. And that was an approach that was taken, and I think we've talked about in previous meetings here, because that was a really, really important approach not to lose the social work values from this. Clearly, all of the customers that are open and have direct payments, all of their packages are reviewed, and that will all be done through a social work assessment. And, I'm proud of our social work service in terms of not losing sight of the principles of the Care Act and what brought many of us into the social work profession in the first place. So I hope that provides some reassurance, and clearly, you know, that's going to be a really important element really in all the kinds of approaches with adult social care in terms of assessment and values underpinning the work we do with you know, vulnerable users across the city.
Thank you very much, Andy. I'm going back now to Stephen, and then if Lucy's got a follow-up to Lucy. Stephen.
Well, before I ask my question, just to clarify, say something a bit more on the point on fostering, because I know that, you know, the churches community which I'm part of in Derby, they've been extensively involved with promoting fostering, of course. And I even, back in the days when we were actually at a church meeting, business meeting, they showed us a presentation when we were actually all together. Can you remember that? Seems like in a different life, doesn't it? And I think there was a quote actually from Sue-Ann herself, you know, about the involvement in that. So I can confirm there is various, at least on that regard, there is various engagement with fostering. But the question I have for Andy is, I've heard various things about the sort of high needs budget for SEND people, obviously children in particular. I've heard various different messages about, you know, waiting, and, you know, waiting for that, or maybe it's here. So how's that been reflected, or will that be reflected in this MTFP?
Well, I think there is reflection in the paper on the high needs block, and that will certainly be in the paper that comes to Council for consideration in February, and I think it's been again well rehearsed through monitoring reports on the pressure currently on the high needs block within Derby, which again, like children's social care, is not unique to Derby, and actually, despite the challenges, the position in Derby is by no means as challenging as acute in some neighbouring councils, both in the East Midlands and across the country. But that said, the high needs block, which essentially pays for services for children with special educational needs and disabilities, is very challenged for a whole range of reasons that I won't necessarily go into now, but hopefully have been well rehearsed and are outlined in the report. I think the important thing is that, you know, what we are doing moving forward in light of the strategy that came via scrutiny to Cabinet before Christmas in terms of our SEND strategy around living our best life, and the associated commissioning strategy and priorities that kind of flow from that strategy. It's now about developing our plans for transformation, which is about how we make Derby a city that works for all children with SEND, but doing that within the available budget that we've got in terms of the totality of the high needs block. And some of that will be about making decisions quite quickly around how we try and manage some of the challenging aspects of the spend, whilst also developing those more medium to longer term transformational priorities as we kind of redesign the system, which we have started and which we're going to be doing over the coming months and years.
Thank you, Andy. Any more questions or comments of Andy before we move on? If not, is anybody that I've actually missed from the strategic directors list who's going to?
I hope you have, Chair. Simon Riley, Strategic Director of Corporate Resources. Given I've got really bad connection issues, I'll just briefly introduce my service. I think if you look at the budget proposals, it's about trying to create us to be an agile, focused, customer-focused council where our processes support the city in achieving the best outcomes. So what we got here is sort of a, sorry, just 1 minute. I'm just going to go into another room so you can actually hear me. Hold on.
Okay. I think Simon's coming out of his man cave and going somewhere else. So we'll just talk amongst ourselves for a second. And
Hi, Chair. Oh, Simon's going to
okay.
Big screen.
Is that better, Chair?
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just wait for the Chief Executive to socially distance himself. I can confirm he is socially distanced.
Simon, you're always determined to get the CEO's office, so that's a very cunning move on your part.
I have no aspirations for positions of power, Councillor Repton, as I hope you know. So Corporate Resources is here to support the organisation in achieving its priorities in terms of achieving the best outcomes, managing the interface with customer services, creating efficient, effective and economic processes within the council. And our proposals this year are really carrying on the transformation that started a couple of years ago in terms of looking at efficiencies in our service, looking at our customer interface and allowing better information for our website and digital engagement, in terms of property rationalisation and reducing the number of properties that we have and focusing on core assets. And the budget carries on that journey of preparing for more efficient and effective services. So just to probably put a flip side, you can also see that for Corporate Resources, I think the importance of the services that we provide, Derby Direct, the single discretionary award, council tax in terms of giving out business grants, is that we have demonstrated that we are providing effective and agile services to respond to changing need in the city, and I think that's quite important. And I think we also need to be picking up the point that what this budget is trying to achieve for my service is that we can be prepared to meet the challenges of our medium-term financial plan and for financial sustainability for future. And the report highlights, obviously, a lot of the inputs that are creating that. So, sorry if that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. It is included in paragraph 4.64 to 4.73 of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Any questions of Simon at all? Okay. Is there any questions that any executive members have got of any of the officers with us before we draw this to a close? I do want to raise again my disappointment at Cabinet not agreeing to accept our recommendation with regard to vouchers for the whole of 21 and beyond. And I'm contemplating now, with your support, members of Executive Scrutiny, to put this recommendation again to Cabinet, and that is Executive Scrutiny again requests Cabinet to fully implement the November Council motion regarding the failure to provide food vouchers throughout 2021 and beyond. Failure to do this fails many children and families in this city. I think we made our position quite clear at the last meeting that we supported Cabinet doing this. They failed to do that. I think it's beholden on us, especially at this budget time, to ask again at this 11th hour for them to reconsider. Hopefully members of the Executive Scrutiny will again support this as they did the previous one. Do I have a seconder for that at all?
Yes, I'll second that.
Thank you, Fareed. Okay, does anyone want to comment, or shall we just go to the vote on that? Right, okay.
Sorry, Chair, can I just comment on that? I was just checking up because I wondered if we could put in something a bit more about looking at making it sure we do. Jay, you've obviously just highlighted on the vouchers, but looking in particular at eligibility of people as well, to sort of bring that out a bit more in your proposal as well, and make particularly people on universal credit. I don't know if you can put that in somewhere in it.
I'm quite happy if you wish to amend it, Stephen. I'm prepared to look at that and consider that, unless you want to put a separate motion of that to be one and then perhaps two. So I'm in your hands, Stephen. You tell me what you'd like to do.
I think it's good to say to fully implement the November Council motion regarding the failure to provide food vouchers through and beyond, and also to consider, eligibility, in particular families on universal credit, because that was also a key. I'm actually just sort of you've taken us a bit aback with doing that. I was just going back to look at the original motion a minute, Chair. So whether once the Chair's got some other questions, whether you just give me a chance to her while she asks her questions, just to dig back and to sort of come up with a proposal. That okay, Chair?
Okay, yeah. If you do that, Lucy, a couple of questions.
Yeah, I've got one very simple question, which is there's a reference to bold land on paragraph 483 as a list of projects that are no longer going ahead. Is this Bold Lane? And if so, which project on Bold Lane? So that's a simple one.
Yeah, it is Bold Lane, and it's next to the architects between the architects building and Middleton House.
The development of one of the Connect buildings, it would have been.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. In paragraph 430, you itemise a long list of risks, and it feels a longer and more uncertain set of risks than we usually have in a report like this, and it's not surprising given where we are. But I just wondered if you could say something more about the mitigations that are being put in place to try and reduce the likelihood of some of those risks. Obviously not all of them are in our control.
Okay, thank you for that. And Councillor Kerr will be aware that as part of a budget report, I personally have to produce what is called a Section 25 assessment of the robustness of estimates and reserves, which will pick up more detail on the risks. Some of these risks were in relation to uncertainty about the local government finance settlement and whether support would be given in respect to collection fund, social care, grants and precept, which obviously have been mitigated partly by the draft financial settlement. The new homes bonus remains a concern for all councils, as that potentially gets replaced with an alternative methodology, as yet unknown. So we're trying to mitigate our reliance on new homes bonus. The pay award, we think it's mitigated by making a 1% pay award provision in line with the government's pay restraints. Though we have to make members aware that local government is not part of a national pay civil service award. It is with the local government employers, so we'll wait to see that. The savings plans, even against the backdrop of COVID, we have been more successful than many in delivery of our savings plans, and the details in this report have business cases behind it, and we feel that we should have the plans in place to achieve that. COVID-19, there's certain provisions in the budget, placeholders, if I can call it, for emerging pressures and income, as I mentioned earlier, that I feel reasonably confident that we have provided mitigation and financial cover with what we expect to be a going back to normal or going back towards normal in the 21-22 financial year. Brexit, when I wrote this report, obviously had not had the parliamentary vote. Our main concern remains things like supply chain and everything else, but at this moment there is not enough visibility or certainty to revisit our medium-term financial plan. And the workforce profile has been raised previously, and we feel that the number of job losses and the ability to hopefully redeploy those people impacted into other vacancies, if they are suitable, should mean that our workforce profile can carry on doing the tremendous job for the people at Derby that have demonstrated during here. So I will do a more detailed appraisal and put some financial quantification to it as part of my Section 25 statement. But I think these risks are managed in this medium-term financial plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That was, I think, very helpful. And I look forward to the further report.
Thank you very
Can I have
much.
my second question, Chair?
All right, go on, Lucy. I've got other people to ask as well. Go on. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And this is one of principle where we have an item included in the capital programme, which has a figure against it at the moment. How there are times when investment in the capital will actually reduce the costs going on, and I had an example of that being mentioned to me actually in a Derby Homes context this afternoon, where they were talking about equipment that may have a higher capital cost but a lower running cost. And this obviously works in buildings, it can work in investment in training and a number of other things. What is the attitude to needing to borrow more to be able to make a saving in the future? Is there a philosophy, is there a policy behind that?
Thank you, Chair. And in the February Council meeting, I bring the potential borrowing, which has a number of principles around it being affordable, sustainable and prudent. This report and the section on capital is very much that we need to look at investor save schemes. That may be that we can have reduced revenue operating costs or sort of returns on our investment which are beneficial. They're not just financial, they might be also social, climate and other aspects. So our principle is, as long as it's affordable, prudential and sustainable, we would encourage our directors and our portfolio holders to come forward with proposals that may need borrowing with a positive revenue or economic or social return in the future. And I know I've picked up on that theme at a number of scrutiny panels over the past year. So principle is we support it, Councillor Kerr, but as with everything, it's got to be evidenced against those criteria and with a financial case and a outcome plan linked to it. Thank you.
Right, okay. Now, I am aware we've been here for almost an hour and a half now. We've got full council tomorrow evening. We've got the full council meeting to discuss the budget in great depth. So I'm going to suggest now that we take. I've got a comment by. Let me just quickly go through these. Let's have a look. Yeah, I think Miles wants to ask a question.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's a similar point question I think I asked of Simon at the last exec when we had this similar recommendation come forward, which is what would the cost implications be of Councillor Repton's recommendation and where the funding would come from?
Thank you. And I'll refer, obviously, all members back to the report, which was received by Cabinet last week, which had a series of costed proposals. I think I will also just ask you to recognise, as I think was said on that night, that though we know at the moment the number of free school meal eligible children, we do not know the wider numbers attached to the extended recommendation, which I think Councillor Willoughby was suggesting. And that report did indicate, even just for free school meals, if that recommendation was put forward, that we had done an indicative costing of over £2 million for that, which doesn't meet the criteria of a financially sustainable budget with no recurrent use of reserves. So I refer you back to the report of last week.
Okay, right.
Okay, cheers. If I could just add one more point, Chair, actually. It's just because earlier in the meeting, I think Councillor Willoughby was stressing the importance of not raiding the reserves, and is now suggesting that we, in fact, do so and find some magical way of replenishing them. So, just with all that considered and not being fully costed, I will be voting against this.
Right. Okay. Right. I'm going to take the recommendation. Can I ask Stephen to? There's three recommendations. If you could take the first one, please, Stephen. Take us through it and then take the vote. Are you there, Stephen?
I am, Chair. I'm just
okay, thank you.
Turn my camera on.
So that's it. Exec scrutiny again requests.
So I shall go for the first one, Chair. I'm reading it out now. To recommend to Council Cabinet that it fully implements the November 2020 Council motion regarding the failure to provide food vouchers throughout 2021 and beyond, and the expansion of free school meals provision to every child whose family is in receipt of universal credit or equivalent, or with a low income and no recourse to public funds. Failure to do this fails many children and families in the city.
Okay, thank you.
Got that one. I'll go through the list of members, Chair. Councillor Kerr, please.
Mr. Chair, I'm okay with that one.
In favour, Councillor Kerr, thank you. Councillor Evans, please.
Against.
Against, Councillor Evans, thank you. Councillor Hudson, please.
Against. I'll wait to see the amendment at the budget meeting. Thank you.
Against, Councillor Hudson, thank you. Councillor Hussain, please.
For.
For, thank you, Councillor Hussain. Councillor Patterson, please.
Against.
Against, thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Paul Pegg, please.
For.
For, thank you, Councillor Pegg. Councillor Testro, please.
Against.
Against, Councillor Testro, thank you. Councillor Willoughby, please.
I'm for, please.
For, Councillor Willoughby, thank you. And finally yourself, Chair.
For.
For, Chair, thank you. That's 5 in favour and 4 against.
Okay, thank you. If you can take us through now the second recommendation, please, and that's the Cabinet considers inclusion of the measures to replenish reserves as part of the budget. Can you just go through that, please, Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Kerr, please.
Can't hear you, Lucy.
Sorry, could you read out what we're...
I'll read it out, Chair.
Thank you.
To recommend to Council Cabinet that it considers inclusion of measures to replenish reserves as part of the budget.
Thank you. Yes, I support that.
In favour, thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Evans, please.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. For. Councillor Hudson, please.
Against that, thank you.
Against, Councillor Hudson, thank you. Councillor Hussain, please.
For.
For, thank you, Councillor Hussain. Councillor Patterson, please.
Against.
Against, thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Paul Pegg, please.
For.
For, thank you, Councillor Pegg. Councillor Testro, please.
Against.
Against, Councillor Testro, thank you. Councillor Willoughby, please.
Yeah, I'm for, please.
For, Councillor Willoughby, thank you. And finally yourself, Chair.
For.
For, thank you, Chair. So that's 6 in favour and 3 against.
Right, okay, and then we've got the final one from Councillor Willoughby. Cabinet to ensure that free school meals provision, as passed at full council and presented to Cabinet on the 13th of January, is incorporated in the revised MTFP they present to February's full council meeting.
Thank you, Chair. I'll go through the members. Councillor Kerr, please.
Yes, I support that. And Chair, I've put a recommendation into the chat as well.
Okay.
In favour, thank you, Councillor Kerr. Councillor Evans, please.
Against.
Against, Councillor Evans, thank you. Councillor Hudson, please.
Like a broken record, against.
Against, Councillor Hudson, thank you. Councillor Hussain, please.
For.
For, thank you. Councillor Hussain. Councillor Patterson, please.
Against.
Against, thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Paul Pegg, please.
For.
For, thank you, Councillor Pegg. Councillor Testro, please.
Against.
Against, thank you, Councillor Testro. Councillor Willoughby, please.
Yeah, I'm for, please.
For, thank you, Councillor Willoughby. And finally yourself, Chair.
For.
For, so that's 5 in favour and 4 against.
Okay, and then we've got the final one before we wrap up business, and that's from Lucy. Recommendation to Cabinet that they apply the philosophy to invest now to save in future in the renewal of Ravensdale Infant School, and ask officers to work up a design for a new school that will be zero carbon in operation. So if you can take that to the vote, please, Stephen.
I will do, Chair. Councillor Kerr, please.
For.
For, Councillor Kerr, thank you. Councillor Evans, please.
For.
4. Councillor Evans, thank you. Councillor Hudson, please.
Yeah, for that one, thank you.
4. Thank you, Councillor Hudson. Councillor Hussain, please.
4.
4. Thank you, Councillor Hussain. Councillor Patterson, please.
Yeah, for that one. Thanks.
4. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Paul Pegg, please.
4.
4. Thank you, Councillor Pegg. Councillor Testro, please.
4.
4. Thank you, Councillor Testro. Councillor Willoughby, please.
I'm for that one, please.
4. Thank you, Councillor Willoughby. And finally, yourself, Chair.
4.
4. Thank you. That's unanimous in favour, Chair.
Thank you very much. Well, that I think brings us to the close of the meeting. I think we've covered extensively a whole range of areas. I'd like to thank all the senior officers for coming along and members of the executive committee. I am sorry that we couldn't have cabinet members here to answer some of the political questions, but no doubt we'll ask similar questions tomorrow night and at the budget meeting. Thank you all for attending, and have a nice evening.
Take care. Bye.